recording button. Thank you. Okay, so greetings everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. It's tonight, at least here in the Netherlands. This event is organized by the ICOMOS Netherlands Lecture Committee. Every month, this committee organizes a lecture evening on different heritage-related topics and projects. My name is Sophia Lovegrove, and I'm here together with Maurits van Putten, and we'll be hosting and moderating this event together. Before I show you the program, Jeroen Boutsman, Secretary General of ICOMOS Netherlands, wanted to share some words on a project that he's involved with together with ICOMOS US. I think, Jeroen, if you would like to.
Yeah, maybe
yes,
it is
perfect.
Also because of the topic of resilience of people, and especially enslaved people and indigenous people. I would like to bring your attention to a project which we work with ICOMOS US, and that is the project of the International Network of the Railroad for Underground Railroad for Freedom. And please note, for those who are completely new to us, a railroad has nothing to do with trains or underground or something like that. These railroads were the escape routes for the enslaved people, mainly, you mentioned it, for the southern states in the US, to the states which had already abolished slavery, the northern states, Canada, but also, for instance, Mexico. In the first half of the 19th century, through this network of secret roads, of meeting points and safe houses, more than an estimated 100,000 enslaved people managed to escape and free themselves. In the late 90s of last century, the US National Park Service established the so-called National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom program, and it was to identify associated sites, to present these, to popularize these, and to post stories about people and places which were related to this Underground Railroad. September became this way the so-called International Underground Railroad Month. And last September, ICOMOS US, on the request of the National Park Service, launched the International Network for this railroad. It is about stories of enslaved who managed themselves to seek freedom. And this is obviously not something which is limited to Northern America. A strong example we see, for instance, in Suriname, where Maroon societies organized themselves and were accepted by, at a certain moment already in 1768, by the government of the Dutch colonies. And in fact, these are examples of free black states outside of Africa. I'm therefore very happy that we could provide these examples to be added to the International Network of Railroads to Freedom. And the importance of Maroon societies as well as the indigenous societies is also the subject of the talks of tonight. And I've said more than enough, but if you want to know more about this, please go to the website of ICOMOS US, where you will find the whole map with international sites which are related to this subject. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeroen, for sharing. Sounds like a really interesting project. Maybe we can go back to it during the Q&A if anyone has questions. And Maurits, could you maybe share the program, please?
Does this work?
Yeah. I don't know if you can make it full screen, but this is also because we can still see the edges, but we can. If I don't know if it's.
Sorry. I don't see it. Right.
Let's see, maybe. Well, I think in any case, I can just go on. I think it you can see.
Sorry.
I think one can. It's readable, I think. Thank you. Yeah, so as the title of the event suggests, we are focusing tonight on issues surrounding the representation of and the research about nature and biocultural heritage. More specifically, this event will be about two collaborative projects that involve working with and within different systems of knowledge and around these topics of nature and biocultural heritage. The first part of the event focuses on a collaboration between Suriname and the Netherlands. And then for this part, Arjen Kok, Raika Scherer, and Tinde van Andel will be presenting different parts about this project. And then we will have a short Q&A when, if there are immediately some questions about this first part of the event, they can be asked then. We'll be followed by a short break. And then we will go into the second part of the lecture evening, when Luciana Martins will be giving a presentation about a collaborative research project that involves Brazil and the United Kingdom. And we will have time for more, we'll have a bit more time at the end for more questions and discussion. And I will now introduce the first group of speakers. Arjen Kok is an art historian and museum collection specialist at the Cultural Heritage Agency of the Netherlands. He is currently involved in several projects on topics that include transport heritage, contested heritage, and collection policy. Tinde van Andel is a senior researcher of ethnobotany at Naturalis, professor of ethnobotany at Wageningen University, and professor of the history of botany and gardens at Leiden University. As an ethnobotanist, Tinde studies traditional plant use, and she is involved in research projects, for example, just as an example, about historical herbaria and botanical drawings in the Leiden treasure rooms and wild food collection by hunter-gatherers in Cameroon. And Raika Scherer is a cultural anthropologist trained at the University of Vienna and the Erasmus University Rotterdam. And Raika is now currently working at the Science Education Center Natuurerlebnis Park in Graz in Austria. And her research focuses on the ontological turn, influences of the Anthropocene in the natural heritage sector and indigenous and Western knowledge systems. And without further ado, I'll ask Arjen to start this first part of the event.
Yes, thank you, Sophia. Is this okay? Well, what I would like to say about the project that I'm involved in since about 2015, 2016, is that it is confronting me with a completely new situation, something I really never experienced before. Because I was asked to help with a project, a heritage project in the community of the Aucan Maroons in Suriname, initiated by the Granman and coordinated by Thomas Polimé, a cultural and anthropologist. And so far I thought, well, this is simple. They want a museum, so we're going to help to get them a museum. But gradually, I came to realize that this was far more complicated than the average project I was doing in the Netherlands or elsewhere. And one of the elements and one of the aspects in this project was that I realized that there are different worlds of knowledge involved in this project, and somehow for me that created a challenge for me. At that time, Raika contacted me to ask for some help with her master thesis, her research, because she was looking into the question, what do natural history museums in the West do with their collections and displays on non-Western natural worlds? and how do they deal with the knowledge systems that are connected to that? And then I thought, well, this is really something which will help me to understand what the situation is and to have a better understanding of my role or the possibility of my role. So I asked her to write a report on this question. What is the relation, what ideas are there on the relation between Western, non-Western knowledge systems, ontologies? And I think it helps me a lot in understanding what to do in the project in Diitabiki, which is a very complicated project. I must stress that as well. It's not just about the integral approach of their heritage, including natural heritage, of course, but also built heritage, the intangible heritage, the rituals, etc. So it is in that sense a very complicated situation. Well, anyway, Raika just wrote this report for us, and I think it will help us to understand how to work in this program of international heritage cooperation, because that's the point, what it's all about. What does this cooperation mean in this situation? So, as an introduction, I'd like to just stress this element that cooperation is not a self-evident thing. It's not very clear when you work in these situations. And I think it's very important for us as a cultural heritage agency in the Netherlands to understand what it means if we enter this program of international heritage cooperation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sophia and Arjen, for the introduction. I'll just share my slides. Okay, yeah, so thank you. I want to present a small part of my report, and with this provide some food for thought for regarding the question how to deal with the encounter of different systems when representing natural heritage. And I do this by presenting an ontological approach, which might sound rather abstract at some points, but I think it's worth to take a look at and maybe take away some aspects for future encounters with other knowledge systems. So in the year 2012, Perotta and Trosper wrote in their work about traditional forest-related knowledge that forest managers, policymakers, and the scientific community have too long ignored, denigrated, and even suppressed the knowledge and experience of traditional societies. Now, today, 10 years on, the importance of indigenous knowledge is widely known and rich, ranging from fields such as soil and plant taxonomy, medicine, ecology, conflict management, and many others. But as we know, this knowledge is not only complementing the so-called Western knowledge, but provides new approaches and directions for challenges which cannot be resolved using the existing of the Western framework alone. However, despite this awareness and the aim to integrate other than the Western knowledge, so to say, into academic research, many scientists and researchers still struggle to generate deep knowledge and output when it comes to the encounter of two or more knowledge systems. So according to Bruno Latour, there are three main realizations when a researcher attempts to foster a meaningful exchange or interaction with someone who operates in another knowledge system. First comes the realization that one holds a too limited set of templates or tools to account for the reality mentioned by the other. Second, one realizes that this might be the reason why there's misunderstanding, shock, or irritation. third, there's an attempt to repair the relation by negotiating a plausible account that enlarges the number of templates we are collectively able to entertain and with which we may resume future relations. Now, especially the third point might sound rather abstract. However, it can be broken down to the effort to find a common ground to start from. And this is sometimes, of course, anything but an easy task, especially because in order to be able to create a common ground, one needs to be able to identify what are the aspects that are holding back from finding this common language, being able to talk about the world or even a specific research question without misunderstandings. And therefore, I want to present this noteworthy and currently discussed train of thought that tries to give some guidelines where to start in this matter and how to go about the surrounding complexity. At the heart of this approach lies the term ontology. More concrete, it is the attempt to talk about specific matters in a new way by shifting conversations from epistemological questions, so how something is perceived by different people, to what is called ontological questions, so what is there to be perceived in the first place. I want to give an example. So the writer Pedro Neves Marques, in his essay Mimetic Traps, Forest Images Worlds, about Amerindian ontologies, and illustrates that often a forest is not perceived as one forest by people living in the Amazonian regions. He goes on to explain that their forest might be better understood as a multiplicity of images or a kind of crystal with many sides, angles, and perspectives looking back at each other. So the forest, let's say, for instance, a Western trained researcher is talking about might not be at all the same forest somewhere in the Amazon is thinking of, while having a conversation about seemingly the same topic. This is what Latour calls the limited set of templates to account for the reality mentioned by the other. In this sense, it is helpful to start by assessing what kind of things there are to be seen, instead of jumping right into questions about how someone perceives the forest or a tree. And speaking of trees, one great example, therefore, is the narrative of the ancestral tree, ancestral tree plenty, as told by the indigenous knowledge holder Abel Rodriguez. And he writes, each ethnic group in the Amazon has its own version of the narrative of the tree of plenty. This ancestral tree is referred to as the tree above, the water tree, the underground tree, the spiritual tree, the grandfather tree, and the tree of creation. The story passes through the roots, branches, flowers, fruits, and seeds. It also talks about the tree family, the trunk, bark, color, resin, smell, and some kinds of associated venom. Each branch contains explanations about the composition of the tropical forest. In other words, the order of the forest is the order given by the ancestral tree. And what is interesting, he continues to explain that the story, in all its variations, narrates the origin of agriculture, as well as the negotiation of practices, the origin of rituals, and even accounts of labor, violence, and disease. So this is a good example to show dealing with varying perspectives on, for instance, the subject tree or forest, but in fact about very different things or matters. In this case, one matter is a complex order of ecological and social interactions on ethical and spiritual levels that is narrated through oral history and manifested in the physical plants. And I think that, for instance, a tree as a tangible object or plant. So the ontological approach is not something completely new, but it should be rather understood as a tool to bring attention to the matter of things in order to avoid misunderstandings when exchanging knowledge between different knowledge systems. Now, let me show you another aspect why it is important to discuss the matter of things, or let's say what things there are to be seen in the first place before starting a conversation about these things. I think you know Philip Descolas' ethnography beyond nature and culture. And there he made an attempt to create a typology of ontologies. And even if it's of course not exhaustive and the lines between ontologies are very blurring, it has some quite interesting aspects as it shows how knowledge is shaped by ontology and how it is therefore important to get to know the other party's ontology in order to understand and learn from their knowledge. The foundation for Descolas' categorization of ontologies is the assumption that the recognition of the other is only possible in relation to one very own resources, meaning the own body and intentionality. Therefore, we can specify unknown objects or things in the world by ascribing them an interiority, so an inner life, or exteriority, let's say body, different to our own. So according to Descolas, there are 4 possible combinations of the interplay of interiority and exteriority, leading to 4 more general types of ontologies. That would be animism, which Descolas claims that animistic people recognize an identical interiority in non-humans. You could also call it soul or anima. And consequently, plants, animals are seen as persons who resemble humans in the inner soul, but are different in their outer looks. In totemism, however, not only the interiority, but also the physicality is similar to the own. And here, the boundaries between human and non-human become blurred in specific contexts of hybridization that is found, for example, among the Aborigines in Australia. Then we have naturalism, which is characterized by a universal physicality combined with diverse and random interiority. So in other words, the bodies of animals and humans have similar features, skin, organs, molecules, etc., but different consciousness or anima. And as Eduardo Kohn points out, this is typical for the modern West. And finally, in analogism, the world is split into a various number of beings, forms, substances, where interiorities as well as exteriorities of animals, plants, and all non-humans are different to the own. So with all of this, Descolas concludes that the variance of relations between human and non-human beings is not based on these different perspectives on nature or specific aspects of it. Instead, he says that the way of defining and seeing nature is part of different ontologies. That would mean ontology comes first. And the same goes for the research. So when we encounter people with different ontologies, we need to firstly assess what are the things they see and how are they constituted. By doing so, we are able to find and enlarge these numbers of templates we are collectively able to entertain and with which we may resume future relations, to return what the tour said. In other words, being aware of these ontological differences and the different possible constitutions of the world can be a useful tool to generate in-depth insights into other knowledge. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you, Raika. Thank you for your short overview of your far larger research you've done. The reason I asked you to do this presentation was that Tinde van Andel, ethnobotanist working at the Natalis Museum and the Leiden University, the Wageningen University, is involved in the Diitabiki project as well. She has been working with the Aucan Maroon community for a long time, and she is doing her research there but also now involved in this heritage project. And this is what I would like to talk about with Tinde. Tinde, you visited Diitabiki this summer for a particular project that you were invited for. Could you tell us what the project exactly was and is still?
The project was both a request by Thomas Polimé and the Diitabiki Museum to me if I would help some Aucan people inventorize a number of trees along a forest trail. And I was also interested for my own research on traditional rice growing in the area. So we sort of combined this. We also made an inventory of the different rice varieties in the village, because that's very much part of the Maroon cultural heritage as well. And myself and a young botanist, Isabella Pombo-Geertsma, went with a few Maroon guides into a long forest trail and identified the trees of interest. And we also did that in the village itself. And I also brought my son, who's a bird watcher, and identified the birds along the trails, because another aim of the Maroon Diitabiki Museum is also to attract tourists. And some of the tourists who really like to go deep into the forest are bird watchers, and they also spend a lot of money mostly. So they're sort of profitable tourists. So we discussed with the Diitabiki Museum people that it would also be useful to do some wildlife inventarization, because more tourists are interested in animals than in plants.
Still, the project is initiated because the Aucan Maroon community wanted to preserve their heritage, but also to make it visible, accessible for other people, for tourists, for instance. How did the people that were helping you take their decisions in what they wanted to share and how they wanted to share this with you?
It depended a little bit on the people you talk to, because when we came there, the village authorities had sort of appointed two guides, two males in their, one of them was 30, the other one was 60 something, to go with us into the forest. It was a sort of faraway forest trail. So when we did that forest trail, our task was to identify important trees or the plants. But as a botanist, I know that the information you get depends on the people you ask and the things you ask. So when we did the trail, we ended up with a lot of trees that are important to males. And we had some very little fruits, lots of important trees for wood to make boats and houses and so on. And very few medicinal plants. And as an ethnobotanist, I know that different knowledge of different people. So we had very few edible fruits, but we took them as botanists. You have to make a botanical voucher in order to identify it. And then the not important edible fruits we still took with us. And then the village children, when they saw us, they start eating those fruits. So we found that when you want to ask about edible fruits, you shouldn't ask males of 50 or 60 years old. You should ask children, because they are much more involved in eating everything they find on their way. So that's why we actually also, for our village trail, we took the children with us, because that gives us a completely different type of information. And since our children fish on the beach outside of our house, we also decided to make a small inventory of fishes with all their local Aucan names. And we verified that with a fish specialist, and he said, "Oh, that's interesting. I never knew these names have not yet been recorded."
That sounds great. That sounds like, you know, new knowledge being made available for others to share and to know. In what way do you recognize the elements, this relation between different ontologies, different knowledge systems, as Raika has just described? How do you experience that in your work?
As an ethnobotanist, you are always interested in other people's knowledge in the first place. So for me, it's just not so much new or strange to listen what other people's knowledge is and try to work with that. But maybe for other researchers who are pure botanists or pure zoologists, they take their own knowledge as a starting point, while ethnobotanists first listen to people and then listen what they have to say about plants. But of course, I also ask questions, because some parts of knowledge are so obvious to people that they don't even think about it as knowledge, and they don't even think about that it's also to preserve or transfer, because it's so obvious. So we will ask questions when we pass certain plants or animals, or mostly plants in my case, because I can sort of smell that they're being used, but people don't even think about that is also part of their culture, because it's too obvious.
This is one of the things that really puzzles me. Is, are the things I do not understand and do not see, because they are obvious for them, but they're absolutely invisible for me. How do you experience that? In what way do you deal with that?
Invisible for you as a person, Arjen?
As a, let's say, a Western academic, interpreting visual culture in a certain way, which is...
Well, the Maroon knowledge of the natural world is not one-to-one comparable with the Western knowledge. We, Western botanists, we distinguish sometimes different species, but for the Maroon, they're all used in the same way, and they're different to tell apart, so he has only one word for it. Because they're all edible, or they're all used for the same medicine, so no need to distinguish in different types. When we say rice, we only think there's one rice. But in Diitabiki, there are at least 50 different varieties of rice that people can perfectly distinguish. But rice is not so important to us. So we do not really distinguish. We think it's all one species. So we overlook it. So that is there's a difference between classification and a difference between importance. Depends on the species. Yeah, and so it goes with fish, and so it goes with animals. Some brown birds, they all look the same, they have one name, but the jaguar is an important animal, so it may have different names because they distinguish different types of jaguar.
Okay. Well, thank you, Tinde. I think we've reached our limit of time. So, Sophia, please
Yes.
take over, if you will.
Thank you, the three of you. And there are indeed a couple of questions in the chat already, so I'll ask these, and then we can have still a short break. I have three questions. Okay, one question from Veronica Cueva Peralta to Tinde van Andel. She asks, where do the children get the knowledge about edible trees or plants? And I'll ask, sorry. Yeah, no, go ahead.
That is a good question. If the parents think they are worthless, how do the children know? Well, parents have been young, and they sort of look down upon them as sort of monkey food. But children are constantly foraging, I would say. And they go in groups of 3-year-olds until 14-year-olds, and they learn from each other mostly. And when they get 16 or 17, they don't eat that monkey food anymore. But I know from our earlier ethnobotanical work that children know things that parents don't really want to know anymore. And they're always overlooked, and people say always knowledge is dying, but nobody asks the children what actually you know and listens to them. So that is what I often do, and I also enjoy. And then you see also that children have different needs. They need food, they need to grow, so they eat much more fruits. They're constantly searching for fruit. And parents, they don't eat as much fruit.
Thank you.
That's just an example. And they fish, very small little fish that they can catch themselves. To a grown-up, that fish is not important, but for children it is.
Interesting. Thank you, Tinde. There's also a question from Jenna Smith to Arjen. What made you realize that there were different knowledge systems involved in the Diitabiki project, and what could you do or are doing to repair the relation as put in the presentation by Raika?
Well, the moment I realized that something was different is when we were talking about preservation, and preservation is very much something that you try to, in the West, in our situation, you try to keep things as they are. Whereas in the community in Diitabiki, it's very much part of a living culture. So it's quite a different approach. And that sort of made me realize that there are differences. And I think that these differences are very valuable. And so for me, it was something to explore and to look into. And I think what we learned from them is that heritage is not so much a different domain. It's not so much as something that's, you know, outside society, but it's just part of society and part of their culture. And that fascinates me. And well, the coincidence that Raika came along was for me the reason to ask her and to get involved and to help us a little more in these questions.
Maybe a quick question to you. To what extent have you also learned from each other in this process? Because although as I understand, you're not directly involved in the Diitabiki project, but I'm sure you've learned or heard a lot about it from Arjen. I was curious here. Yeah, how if this learning about this project has also informed or helped you further develop your ideas about this topic.
For me, it has informed me very much because, as I told, I was just about to my master's work with natural history museums, so it was like objects already in museums, and this project that is in the working and the exchange with the people, and I also messaged Tinde in that period to ask her about the project because I could learn very much from the project and the practice because I came more from the theory in the sense like just fresh from university.
Did you want to add anything, Arjen?
Well, for me, it's a beginning. This a beginning in the sense that I would like to understand more of how to use the knowledge of the Maroon community for our own practice, is how to turn it around. And this cooperation, which has always been approached by us from our point of view, what can we do to turn it around to help us understand our way of dealing with heritage in, you know, a better way?
Thank you, Arjen. I'll ask one more question, and we'll take a very, very short break. From Tamara van Kessel. Given that we are discussing differences in worldview, it seems to me a bit surprising to have profitability in relation to bird tourism mentioned as a given, a value that any culture is assumed to strive for. Is it too radical to question whether this too should be subject to scrutiny when looking into differences in knowledge systems? And I'm not sure Tamara mentioned for who the question should be, but I think to Tinde or for Arjen, I think. Yeah.
Well, it's one of the first questions that's been asked when you tell you're involved in a museum project in Diitabiki. One of the first things that people say is, well, there are no tourists going to Diitabiki, so why bother about a museum? Or very few tourists. Who's going to pay for the museum? And this also is something which is a very Western approach. You know, a museum and everything is about making money. Now, the interesting thing is that this is just as important for them as it is for Western museums. But you can't just switch, let's say, just export our systems and our knowledge and our way of dealing with it to the situation in Diitabiki. So here again, there is a new challenge for us, how to help them to develop these trails and to receive tourists in a sustainable way. And I think that is a very, very important thing. When we ask them how are you going to make money with it, then it also implies that we need to help them to do it in a way that helps them preserve their and you know, develop their culture and their heritage. So it's even more complicated, you might say, than just understanding what needs to be done in the long term and how does it help the sustainability.
I may add that another group of Maroons, the Saramaccan Maroons, has established a museum a few years ago on Saramaccan knowledge. The village what nobody went there. And since the museum is there, there is a steady stream of tourists, not too much, but quite some, and it's going surprisingly well. So that was also an example for some of the Maroons that they wanted their museum, because they have seen that other people did it too. And I think I really like that museum, the Saramaccan Museum, and it is visited by both Saramaccans themselves as tourists, as school children, and I think it's done in a very nice way.
Yes, one of the very important aspects of the museum in the Bigislee, in the Saramaccans, they have involved community in running the museum in a sense. So it's a group of young people who set up the museum and who really decide what happens in the museum, but they involve the whole community in running it. So that's a really great example.
Thank you. And now I'll interrupt here to just fit in a tiny break because we're running a bit late on schedule. I would say ultimate maximum 5 minutes break, just to grab a tea or something like that. And so we will come back at 19 minutes past 8. Well, this is at least here in the Netherlands. But so at 19 minutes past, whichever hour. Yeah, thank you. Okay, I think we can start very soon. Let's see. I see that Luciana has shared her screen, but I don't see Luciana on the screen now. I don't know if I need to change. Let's see.
Yeah.
I see you now.
That I can't see the rest of the my screen, so I can't change the mute and the image.
Oh yeah, no worries.
Yeah, here now.
It never gets easy somehow. These programs. Okay. I'll start by introducing our next speaker. So Luciana Martins is a professor of Latin American visual cultures and co-director of the Center for Latin American Studies at Birkbeck University, and visiting research at U. Her research focuses on the role of visual and material culture in the scientific exploration of Latin America. She's currently working on a monograph titled Drawing Together, the Visual Archive of Expeditionary Travel, and on a Brazil-UK collaborative research project with Gardens on the biocollections of Richard Spruce. Luciana, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sophia, for inviting me to participate in this event. It's really great to share, experience with colleagues. So biocultural collections are a vital means of preserving, transmitting, and generating environmental knowledge and indigenous knowledge. Historical biocultural collections linked with global exploration, colonialism, and expansion are often misrepresented or neglected in terms of research, and their application to contemporary problems overlooked. In the last 20 years, ethnographic collecting institutions have made important advances in digital repatriation, developing ethnomuseological methods to explore it as the intersection of archival interests, indigenous information management systems, archival standards, and divergent notions of access and privacy, Kimberly Kristen puts it. Biocultural collections, however, have yet to develop specific integrating historical environmental knowledge. As Annette Singh suggests, instead of merely catalog diversity, we need to tell the histories in which diversity emerges. Diversity is created in collaborative synergies. It is always becoming. As she further argues, plants and animals are part of a human disturbance regime. They have a contaminated history. The integration of historical and contemporary biocultural data is therefore key to increase understanding of the current use of plant resources that correlates with these biocultural collections. Together with the knowledge of the source communities from which they were originally collected, they provide insight to the nature and drivers of social environmental change since their collection. Creating a digital resource of biocultural collections that gives equal weight to these different knowledge systems, including the natural sciences, social sciences, humanities, and indigenous knowledge, is a major challenge. Biocultural heritage is different from cultural heritage, since it involves, in addition to the confrontation of museums' neocolonial legacy in the 21st century with new co-curatorial practice of indigenous communities, it involves thorny issues related to the sovereign rights over their natural resources in areas within their jurisdiction, as recognized by the Convention on Biological Diversity, which also encourages the equitable sharing of the benefits arising from the utilization of knowledge, innovations and practice of indigenous and local communities, embodying traditional lifestyles relevant for conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity. In order to develop insights to address this challenge, we devised the project Digital Repatriation of Biocultural Collections, collecting scientific and indigenous communities of knowledge in Amazonia, funded by a British Academy Knowledge Frontiers Award. This project forms part of a research program that Birkbeck and the Royal Botanic Gardens EQ have been developing collaboratively since 2015. The research program aims to reanimate the biocultural objects amassed by 19th century botanist Richard Spruce, more on him shortly, creating a major knowledge-based system that will integrate them with herbarium vouchers, manuscript and correspondence spruce sent to Kew and other British institutions. This aims to realize new potential as data for studies of ethnobotanical knowledge and ecological change. As knowledge of indigenous peoples is vital to understanding these materials, the research team have been building partnerships with indigenous communities as well as with research institutes in Brazil, the UK, and elsewhere. This British Academy project brought together an interdisciplinary international team, including indigenous and non-indigenous researchers and museum curators from the UK, Brazil, and Germany to work on these biocultural collections. It's sought to move us towards our broader research program based on spruce collections. And we did this by focusing on a small group of objects originally from Northwest Amazonia, selected from these collections. So let's have a look a little bit at this collection. Richard Spruce spent 15 years collecting plants in the Amazon and the Andes. He started his trip in the mouth of the Amazon, and then he went up to Manaus, Rio Negro, Guapés, up to the Orinoco, with this bit here, then went back to Manaus, up to the Solimões, Ecuador, where he collected cinchona for the East India Company, and then he left from Peru. These collections are currently held mainly at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew, and the British Museum in London. The artifacts Spruce was collecting were sent mainly to the newly created Museum of Economic Botany at Kew, which aimed to provide visitors with object lessons on the use of plants from the four corners of the British Empire and beyond. What is distinctive about Spruce's collecting skills is that he was incredibly systematic. He collected several artifacts made of the same plant and the raw materials associated with them. As we can see in this example of the cassava grater he collected for Kew's museum, cassava being the staple food of the indigenous people in the region, it's possible to cross-reference the artifacts he collected with his herbarium specimen because he numbered and related them accordingly. Photographer Kurt Grunberg, working at the Ethnological Museum in Berlin, traveled to the same Upper Rio Negro region as Spruce did, but 50 years later. Although not regarding his expedition in 1903 as primarily a journey of collecting, Kurt Grunberg ended up collecting nearly 1,300 objects, 1,000 photographs, and word lists from 40 languages and dialects. His collection not only complements Spruce in the sense that it includes artifacts not collected by Spruce and photographs, documented the way that some artifacts were used, but it also provides material for a diachronic study of these artifacts. Our research revolves around the following questions. In what ways can effective collaborative forms of production of social environmental knowledge emerge from cross-cultural research practices? What difference does it make to our understanding of these objects if we consider their mobility through different spatial temporalities, enmeshed in field practice, but also in the Metropolitan Archive? Can digital technologies be used to integrate indigenous knowledge systems into the very core of practice of display, curation, and the reuse of objects and knowledge for multiple audiences? Can biocultural objects from different collections be integrated meaningfully without erasing their different stories, taking into account not only what they were made to be, but what they have become? So let's have a look now at our project activities and outputs. In June 2019, we organized the first project workshop in Berlin and London. While the initial plan was to invite only 3 indigenous researchers to Europe, Oscarina Caldas Azevedo, Adesana, Lucas Alves Bastos, Tucano, and Nildo Fontes, who is also Tucano, the indigenous researchers themselves highlighted the need to include 2 more people in the team, a Baya, a child specialist, and responded to their request. We included in the team the Baya Guilherme Pimentel Tenório, Tuyuca, and the Kumuta Císio Borges Barreto, Tucano. As they explained to us, ceremonies to prepare the team to encounter the objects that have left their home so long ago would protect team members from the eventual evil that the contact with the old objects might bring. In addition, through the proper chants, the object's cosmological force could return to the Rio Negro Mountains, reinforcing the indigenous ancestral culture. The night before leaving Berlin, the Kumuta Císio dreamt of these mountains, which he took as an indication of the safe return of the object's souls. During the workshop at Kew and the visit to the British Museum storage, the same rituals were observed, and indigenous researchers were able to touch and show us how the artifacts were used, while we introduced them to the herbarium specimens and manuscripts from the spruce collections. And I'm going to show you a short film that documents these encounters. To conclude this session, indigenous researchers highlighted the need to produce, in addition to a proposed website, printed pedagogic materials to be used in community schools in remote regions where Wi-Fi and electricity are scarce and unreliable. Responding directly to this identified need, the project plan was revised to include the production of a teaching and learning toolkit based on the biocultural collections. Designed for use within indigenous community schools, these teaching materials aim to disseminate information about artifacts in the spruce collection, together with the biocultural knowledge associated with them. Supported by a Backpack Global Challenge Fund grant, the production of this toolkit in Portuguese with the main terms translated into Tucano language fits within the larger context of current linguistic projects in Northwest Amazonia, which aim to strengthen and enhance indigenous languages. We aim to produce this toolkit during the planned knowledge exchange workshop in Northwest Amazonia in April 2020, which unfortunately had to be canceled due to the pandemic. We therefore had to adapt our plans to produce the best outputs we could under such critical circumstances. This meant liaising remotely with Dagoberto Lima Azevedo, a Tucano indigenous researcher and translator, and finding alternative ways to develop the materials that we were planning to do collaboratively with indigenous researchers, teachers, and pupils in the field. The Teaching and Learning Toolkit consists of a guide for the spruce collections of the Upper Rio Negro. In the first part, we present scientific and indigenous information about a selection of artifacts, organizing according to their use in the malocas, the longhouses, a central element for the social organization of the Rio Negro indigenous communities, where they used to live, keep their artifacts, and perform their ceremonies, which were destroyed by missionaries in the 20th century. The second part includes a broader historical overview of the Upper Rio Negro region in the 19th century, European collectors and their collections, the indigenous and the non-indigenous ideas on digital repatriation, a timeline, and a lesson plan. And we also created this board game that asks players to combine animals and plants used for creating particular artifacts, going through a path by the different habitats where these raw materials are found. And this was illustrated by the artist Lindsay Sekulovic, who is a partner in our project. And these are the artifact cards and the raw material cards. And we also made the pawns by seed of Jupati. Meanwhile, a few communities in the region have got access to Wi-Fi. From March to September 2021, we worked on a series of remote workshops. In these meetings, we shared knowledge about the spruce collection in London, like these drawings, for example, of the Malacca that Spruce did, and also these ones are by Alfred Russel Wallace that are in British archives. And they shared the photos of them building their own Malaccas now, with kind of details about the plants they are collecting, how they, the process of kind of making the knots and how they build it, as well as ceramics. You know, they show the plants that they use for making the mixing with the clay and burning until the final product. We also ran an online plant drawing, a workshop led by Lindsay Sekulovic, which aimed to develop drawing skills as a way of sharpening the eye for botany, as well as a tool for enabling the visual and tactile knowledge of plants to be enhanced amongst the participants. And we had about 56 people participating, including children and adults. In addition, we convened a discussion about the possibility of donating a selection of new artifacts to the National Museum of Rio de Janeiro, with João Pacheco, the curator, and Bruno Pacheco, as a contribution to the recreation of its ethnographic collection that was tragically lost in the fire 3 years ago. So this is an ongoing conversation. In terms of outcomes of these meetings, we aim to help record knowledge about the artifacts and plants amongst the communities for themselves and future generations, document this knowledge for the project, compare and contrast the current use of plants with that of the plants collected by Spruce, probe whether artifacts that used to be made but are not produced anymore might be made again, support management of the important plants if required, support the production of new artifacts that could potentially be sold or donated to the museum, promote the reconnection with ancestral knowledge through the artifacts among the communities. And the project website in Portuguese and in English is hopefully going to be available by the end of this month. Although remote activities are no substitute for face-to-face encounters, especially with the connectivity problems that we face during our virtual meetings, the restructured program of research nevertheless enables us to keep up the interest and engagement of the indigenous communities with our project. The frequency of our remote meetings over a long period of time, and we had about 20 meetings, allowed us to get to know them better and vice versa, building trust, which is key for a more cooperative and human research environment. A small step, hopefully in the right direction. So now just to conclude, the Amazon basin was significantly affected by the pandemic due to limited limited transportation, remote communities, and reduced healthcare access. As Maria Antônia Tigre puts it, with the rapid death of elders, traditional knowledge and practice are threatened. At the same time, fires are causing considerable loss of the biodiversity in the Amazon. In Brazil, agribusiness, mining, and hydroelectric mega projects are expanding to the detriment of biodiversity, indigenous livelihoods, and territorial rights. In this challenging context, the remobilization of biocultural collections in global North museums and collecting institutions through collaborative projects becomes an important asset for indigenous peoples in the global South. As such, the artifacts that are collected within a framework of colonial science can emerge as relevant political tools of cultural resilience, enabling the recovery of social, cultural, and environmental practices in Amazonia. The research program requires long-term commitment, learning to listen and being open and flexible to enable the co-development of research goals, and being prepared to face the challenge of interdisciplinary research, working with multiple institutions with different aims, having to navigate through different geographical scales, the local, the regional, the national, the transnational, and the global. Despite the challenge, and also you have to take into consideration the different spatial temporalities and how to incorporate these into a research plan. And him thinking about funding bodies, they have to understand, that the time period of the projects might be extended. Despite the challenge, these collections are enabling indigenous researchers to recover their own histories, language, and ways of making things. The sustainable management of indigenous territory is inextricably linked to the vitality of their cultural identity, values, and knowledge. While much of the Amazon's life is still unknown to science, making these biocultural collections more widely available unlocks their potential to protect the Amazon today, since ancestral culture and knowledge provide the key to indigenous identity and security. The preservation of the Amazon's biodiversity for future generations depends on finding new ways to support the role of indigenous people as custodians of its biocultural heritage. Thank you.
Thank you, Luciana, for your wonderful presentation. It's really, also the video was really nice to see. I was, before we don't have any questions in the chat yet. I do invite everyone to post questions or share comments, thoughts. You can also use if you go to the bottom of the Zoom page, you have reactions. You can also put your hand up, virtually speaking. If you would like to directly ask a question, that is also possible. And I think I would like to ask if Arjen, Tinde, and Raika might have questions for Luciana and vice versa, now that we have presented projects and yeah. Yes, I see Tinde raising her actual hand.
Yes, Luciana, I really like this project already. A few years ago, I was introduced to it by Mark Nesbitt. And now it's 2021. I hope you're not going to stop this project. Do you find possibilities to continue it?
Yeah, this is the plan. We want to apply for a bigger grant now, involving more institutions, because there are collections from this area, from the Rio Negro, in the University of Coimbra, for example, from the Alexandre Ferreira expedition that was late 18th century. There is in the Museum of Vienna as well. There is Natter collection, which is a bit earlier than Spruce, from the 1820s. So we want to, and also the Berlin collection, Koch-Grünberg. We want to make a bigger project, involving these other collections. And in Brazil, there's the Museu Guilde that has Koch-Grünberg collections as well. So, yeah, we are working on a bigger research grant, but that's the idea. Yeah.
Well, I hope you're successful, because you serve as an example also to several researchers in the Netherlands. I know for sure.
Thanks.
Maybe I can add a few things. It's interesting to know that the National Archive has acquired a collection in some ways similar to Spruce by a Dutch scientist who came from Suriname. He was born in Suriname, Kon Bruining, and he had the commission to do a scientific expedition in the early 50s. And his personal archive has been acquired by the National Archive. And now in the Utrecht archive, there's an exhibition opening up this Sunday in which the Aucan community who's living here in the Netherlands has been invited to comment on the photographs and on all the specimen in the collection of Kon Bruining. They also have had a look at the collection of the Evangelische Broedergemeente, the missionary community who was active in their area. And this archive is being held at the Utrecht archive. So that's why the exhibition is over there. And they also looked into that. So in a way, you could say that it's similar with the Richard Spruce collection, being collected in the past there in that area, being brought to the Netherlands, and then now again being brought back. Because after Utrecht, the exhibition will go to Suriname, to the National Archive in Paramaribo, and to Diitabiki.
That's very nice. Yeah, that's very good. It would be interesting to I mean, I don't know how the exhibition, were you involved in the exhibition?
I was not involved personally, but I was, helping the people to get connected.
Yeah, because it would be interesting to see what's their input into the way the artifacts are presented, was really taken into account, because it's not easy to do that, and that relates to what Raika was saying. There's knowledge systems are so different that how to present them is also a challenge together. I mean, we did that a bit in the guide that we did for this teaching and learning toolkit, and the language fails a bit to incorporate some of the concepts that they have, in relation to these artifacts of ways of behaving, when you make an artifact and this kind of things that we don't even have the vocabulary to express, in Portuguese, in the case that we did the guide in Portuguese. So it'll be interesting to see, how the level of input of the. Thanks.
I think this is maybe something that Tinde experiences as well, because it's one thing that we know is really a problem with our part in the cooperation. Not being able to speak one word in the Aucan language, and requiring them to speak English or Dutch or whatever. So here it's really one thing that I think needs to get more attention if we want to have a more equal cooperation.
Definitely. I think language is key.
I can make a remark here, Arjen. I do speak Sran and Tongo and also a little bit of Aucan. Otherwise, I wouldn't even be able to buy myself a piece of bread in Diitabiki, because nobody speaks Dutch. And the archive collection of photographs was actually curated and interpreted by Thomas Polimé, who is an anthropologist of Aucan origin. He comes from Diitabiki, lives in the Netherlands, and he has been provided alternative explanations to all the pictures, because he saw what was really happening on the pictures, so he could add information that the person who took the pictures had no idea of.
Yes, Thomas is very valuable for both worlds, you might say that.
Yeah.
I think I wanted to ask a question that I think ties into a comment from Tamara van Kessel and related to what she asked before as well. And that relates to if you could maybe, you or Tinde could say something about why Thomas Polimé, who is involved in this project, of course, in Diitabiki, what led to the idea to create such a sort of heritageization project there in the community? Because we had discussions about this before, and I was wondering if you could maybe say something about this wanting to preserve the culture, but it's also living culture, and not just what we see as sort of cultural heritage here in the West, but other interpretations of what is valuable enough to preserve and to show to others. Maybe if you could say something about that.
This is a question for me or Tinde?
I think
Tinde, you've been involved with Thomas for a very long time.
Yeah, Thomas is a very interesting colleague and friend, I would say, because he's with one leg in the interior of Suriname, and with another leg in he's an educated or graduated anthropologist involved in museum collections, so he can live and understand both worlds. And I see that struggle within Thomas, because when he walks in Diitabiki, he sees all kind of, let's say, old or antique objects and wants to collect them. And then people say, Thomas, what are you doing in that rubbish pile? You know, we just threw it away. So he sees objects that he would like to observe that are seen by other people as useless old rubbish. So he constantly struggles with that. Also, how to preserve them, because people preserve them in the tropical rainforest and it deteriorates very quickly. So he also struggles to explain to people that they should, you know, keep it free of insects. And then some people do not see the value of these old things. So he witnesses that every day, I think. And he pays a lot of efforts to trying to communicate. He also brought some people from the traditional authorities to the Netherlands and show them different museums and the way of curating objects. Arjen was also involved in that. But that message is still difficult. And Thomas witnesses, it is really on his plate, I would say.
Yeah. By the way, he would have been present here tonight if it was not for the involvement in the exhibition that's opening this weekend. He said, well, I'm just too busy. I really need to pay attention to the exhibition. So he apologized for not being here.
Thank you, Arjen, for mentioning that. And there's a question in the chat, which I'm quite sure is for Luciana, and from Veronica Cueva-Peralta, and she asks, are written materials compatible with cultures that have strong oral traditions, particularly when it comes to knowledge sharing? And she's referring to she's referring to the education materials that were produced for the project.
Yeah, that's a good question. But, the answer is yes. You know, they have been educated by missionaries in this region. You know, for a long period of time. They all read and write. And they are really making a big effort to enhance their indigenous languages. So they are telling the stories, the kind of original stories. They are publishing them, and they're getting their elders to tell them, and they record, and they are making, you know, this available, because they are really one of the new generations to take that, you know, further. And so the indigenous schools, they learn to write and read. So you know, they of course their culture is very oral, but they don't stay. They are not immune to what happens during the processes of contact with other cultures, and they suffered a lot with that. But at the same time, they learn how to use writing for their own benefit. So they are keen to have. They asked for these materials to be produced for them. You know, they asked because they wanted to have material objects to give to the schools and to work with the students. So it is part of their culture now. I think, you know, the indigenous cultures evolve as well. They change through time.
you. And I see that Mark Nesbitt has included in the chat the link to the book, which I think is in Portuguese, as you said, only in Portuguese.
It's only in Portuguese,
Yeah.
but the website that we are doing has parts of the book, was very much based on the book, and this is being translated into English. Unfortunately, not in the indigenous language yet, but we might do that. I mean, the previous work that we've done, we produced a manual for ethnobotany in an earlier phase of the project, and that was translated into Baniwa and Tucano languages as well. So, you know, this is very important, really, because not all of them speak Portuguese.
Yeah. Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. And I had it, we don't have a question now in the chat. So I had, which is actually great, because then I could also ask questions. But I was wondering, and I think this is a question that all of you can answer, and I think maybe this is also very much related to Raika's thesis, is how also these collaborations within different knowledge systems have also been influencing the way certain collections are being presented in Europe or in the West more generally. And I know that is the case, and but I'm sure you can give maybe some examples on this. Yeah,
I think one aspect of this is the way that the artifacts are separated, you know, organized in the archives. For example, in the Aucan Maroon collection, they are separated by plant specimens, which for the indigenous people don't make any sense at all. You know, when they look at those artifacts in boxes in a very cold environment, dark. They were quite disturbed by it, you know, by the fact. And you know, in the first workshop that we had from this program, it was in 2015. We had another indigenous researcher coming, and he looked at the shield, you know, that was in this box, and said, "Look, this looks like it's dead. You know, this looks like a coffin, and it shouldn't be separated from the spear. You know, you have the shield with the spear, as you saw in the pictured by Kurt Grunberg, you know, that they should be together. So this kind of creating those assemblages, I think this is a way of you know, this knowledge influencing the way. The other aspect also is kind of some sacred objects that shouldn't be, you know, even photographed or displayed. And we had, you know, in the Aucan Maroon collection, there's one example of a trumpet that is sacred that women shouldn't see. And this has been taken away now from the database, the photograph, you know, from the British Museum as well, database. So, you know, it's a slow process. That's what I think. It is a long-term project, but I think, you know, the more, I think that's the key for this kind of cross-cultural and collaborations is really to to get more and more of those communities coming to the museums and really effectively sharing their knowledge in this way, you know, that makes a difference to the way the artifacts are cataloged, the way that they are displayed. And so I'll shut up now. Someone else wants to say something.
Yeah, feel free if anyone, Tinde, Arjen, Raika, if you want to add anything.
Well,
I think
Raika should say a few things about what she discovered in her research.
Yeah, so what I found is that many, especially natural history museums, still struggle very much to incorporate this indigenous knowledge. Especially, yeah, I think Luciana mentioned quite some aspects already, because sometimes they don't even know about indigenous knowledge, like it's indigenous objects, but they struggle to build these corporations. So for me, it's a very fascinating project that I didn't know before, that Luciana is working in, and I think they would have benefited like this whole, like my master thesis as well, because in all these museums I researched, I've never found a project that is comparable to yours. So I find that very fascinating, because mostly it was like one small like context that was given, some small box of text, but not really a new input of the indigenous knowledge. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Thanks. And I think I just want to say that this is a very collaborative project. You know, we are an interdisciplinary team. So we have ethnobotanists, museum curators, anthropologists working with, and indigenous researchers as well. So it's it's important to mention. It's a very you need those different expertise to do this kind of project, because otherwise it's very difficult to embrace the potential really that these archives have, I think, and an artist as well we have working with us, which is fantastic, so we really can tease and explore a bit more these ontologies that you mentioned. I think it's very important point that you made.
I'd like to add, Luciana, because your project is very interesting. It can learn us a lot about how we can deal with this, with questions from their communities. This question has been posed by the community of the Aucan community here in the Netherlands, that they wanted to know how can collections in the Netherlands be more available to their community and to the people in Suriname as well. And what I think is very interesting to learn from a project like the one that Luciana is working on is that repatriation and restitution, which is a growing issue in the Western world at the moment, is not seen in the same legal way as we do it right now by the people who are involved over there. I think it's very important to try to understand how this what it means for them, in order to be able to understand what we need to, what we can do with the repatriation of some of the objects that are in Western collections and Western museums. So that would be an interesting thing to look into in these projects, and to take to the discussion about the legal matters that are discussed in the restitution, the repatriation requests.
Definitely, that's a big question. And what I think what is important in our project, what we really learning is that really is the way of making things that is the important thing to preserve, more than the artifacts themselves. This is something that one of the researchers, when they came, they were looking at the tanga, which is this backcloth, the long one, and we asked him, so do you keep that, when you make it, and do you pass it on to your children? They said, no, we always make a new one. That's the good thing, we don't want to keep that. So they keep some things, but they don't keep others, and so there are different values, because their understanding of artifacts, they are alive, but because they are alive, they die as well. So this idea that there is one case from the Manaus Museum that wanted to restitute, to return some of the artifacts that they had. And it's a very good article, it's in Portuguese though, but by the anthropologist who was working with them. And they said that when the artifacts arrived in the community, in the indigenous community, there was nobody in the streets, nobody, everybody was hiding. They were afraid of those artifacts, because they said, they've been away for so long that they don't belong to us anymore, and they bring evil to our community. So they had to have to get one of the ICOMOS to do lots of rituals to purify and to convince the artifacts that, you know, they were welcome as well, so they wouldn't go against the community. And it was a long process, you know. So you know, that, and another problem of just bringing the artifacts back, I think, apart from the physical thing, is also the problem of who are going to return it from to, you know, because we don't, the provenance of these artifacts is not very clear. You know, with Spruce himself, he bought some of the artifacts from traders. You know, in the region there was already lots of traders, and those artifacts were already valuable then. So, you know, who are going to restitute this too, you know, and within the region, you know, there's a specialization as well of who does what. So, you know, it's all very complicated. I'm not saying that, you know, it shouldn't be done, but I just think it's very complex and needs lots of dialogue and discussion and understanding.
Luciana. And I think as we are now over 9 o'clock, I just wanted to first mention that there is a question, I think from Laren Williams in the chat to Luciana, and it's about the article you mentioned. Yeah. If you don't have it at hand now, you can send it to me and I'll make sure to forward it. I would also like to read it, so that would be, sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it's really nice. I'll do that. I'll send to you.
Perfect.
There's a link, you know, it's online, but I just don't have it with me now. But
Perfect. No, that'd be great. Thank you. If there are any, I just wanted to ask if there are any burning comments that anyone wants to ask. Do it now, or we will then close. Arjen, do you want to add anything?
We have.
Okay.
Can I just say something?
Yes.
I have some of my colleagues here. I just want to know if they wanted to say anything. You know, Mark Nesbitt and Viviane as well, because, you know, they have an interesting perspective. Hey,
yes. Hi. Just congratulations for the event and the presentation, Luciana. Thank you.
Thanks, Luciana, for a great talk. I'm in the middle of nowhere on very weak Wi-Fi, but I hope you can hear me. And I think I've had a little side conversation with Raika, and we should probably talk another time. But I think it's important to say about other natural history museums going down this route. And we're at Kew in very regular conversation with New York Botanic Garden and Missouri Botanic Garden. And maybe there's something about plants and botanists that takes us more in this direction than the conventional natural history museum. So I think this is a conversation that's worth continuing.
And Lindsay, would you like to say anything? Lindsay is the artist. Is there as well? No?
No, thank you, Luciana. It was really, really fascinating. Yeah, no, I have nothing to add. Just, yeah, thank you very much. It's really great to hear this perspective.
Thanks. Yeah, Lindsay is doing a PhD as well, so she'll talk about this one day.
Maybe another lecture evening. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. This was a really, I really enjoyed this evening and the combination of projects. I think it worked really well together, and hearing your experiences, it was really inspiring. I just wanted to let everyone know that the next, so we do these lectures once a month, usually, and we usually stop in the summer. And the next one is on the 15th of December, and it'll be about the traces and significance of pre-Columbian heritage in Latin American cities. So quite different topic. Well, you're welcome to we have the email address that was on the invitation, the lezingen@icomos.nl. Can be used if you're interested. I can also just let you know, if you use the same email address, I can let you know how you can subscribe to our to keep an eye on the other lectures that we organize, because we have this mailing list and we always send out invitations to everyone on it. So I think I'll just wish everyone a good evening, or if you're starting the day, a good day. And thank you all again for the incredible contributions.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I see a lot of thank yous and very nice words in the chat. So I think everyone enjoyed. And I think, Maurits, I think we can stop recording now.
Yep, I will.
Perfect, thank you.